Hi, it's me, Maxi Glamour, and we are starting the Black Friday Ball with some amazing guests that we have here today. Say hello to Phillipe, the Vixen, and Kayla Reed.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
And if all three of you could introduce yourself to all the viewers at home so they can kind of know who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm the Vixen. I am producer of drag show BlackGirlMagic, which uplifts and celebrates the Black femme experience. And I have also been on television. I was young and I needed the money.
Hi, my name is Kayla Reed. I am from St. Louis. I am the executive director of Action St. Louis, which is an abolitionist and Black feminist racial justice org here in St. Louis. And I'm excited to be in conversation today. She, her pronouns.
Hi everybody, my name is Phillipe Cunningham. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns, and I am the Minneapolis City Councilmember representing the 4th Ward in North Minneapolis. I am also an out and proud Black, queer, trans, masculine person, and actually was the first elected to office, and I'm very proud to be able to bring that lens and work to what I do as an elected official.
Y'all are so cool. I'm just honored to be here in this space with you. Thank you for joining. So let's dive deep into some pretty cool questions. I know all of you have like amazing nuggets of knowledge that you're going to drop on all the kids today. And I'm excited to learn, and I'm excited to like learn with you all, because I know some of these questions we're always thinking about. They're always on the forefront of the back front of our mind. To kind of bring them up in conversation is going to be stimulating. So first up, even within marginalized communities, marginalized people perpetuate oppression. What are ways that we can be mindful of our own privilege to combat that oppression?
Yeah,
and anyone
first. Yeah. So I think that's a really good question, and I think it's a lifelong commitment to understanding the way that like power and privilege manifest inside of us, inside of our interpersonal relationships, when we often think about it interacting with like institutions, right? And so when we think about racism, we understand power and privilege along racial lines, but there's intra-power within racial groups that are perpetuated by things like ability, religion, gender, sexuality. And so for the work that I do and the work at Action St. Louis, when we post-Ferguson, when we decided to build this organization, there was a lot of conversation about what it meant to fight for Black liberation and fight for Black power. And we believe that you couldn't build Black power if you weren't centering the folks within Blackness who are often pushed to the margins. And so what does it look like to build an organization that's led by Black women, that's led by Black queer folks, that's led by Black trans folks, and thinking about not only, fighting for those folks, but having those folks in position to lead. And so, and being unapologetic about that there is no Black liberation without Black trans people. There is no Black liberation without Black disabled folks. There is no Black liberation without Black immigrants. And really going through this, not checking off boxes, but doing deep reflection continuously to think about the ways in which even I as a Black queer person show up because I'm cis, because people look at me and don't see queerness, or they don't presume queerness, right? Or they presume, it's just so many ways in which we have to do this kind of internal reflective work, but then also understanding how that manifests in relationships, that we can both be in a marginalized identity and also have enough privilege to stand in solidarity and allyship with other folks in our same group. And so I think Black liberation for a long time, the kind of conversations around it have not been disrupted with the kind of radical queer thought and Black queer feminists of this like modern moment that we're all a part of. And I think we're seeing a lot of leadership push back on kind of dominant narratives that are kind of situated in cis heteronormativity, and disrupting that narrative in hopes that when we get to freedom, it actually isn't perpetuating the same kind of toxic structures that's just now Black patriarchy or now Black male supremacy, but actually starting to think through what does it mean for every single person in our community to be liberated and thinking intimately about the ways in which folks are oppressed and how we need to disrupt those structures.
Yeah, my mind goes back to a Martin Luther King quote that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And for me, that has been like something that I'm like, okay, as long as people are allowed to be treated in a certain way, it doesn't matter if you're one of those people, as long as that is normalized, it could happen to you. And so you have to like kind of lead with that empathy and like knowing that if a woman is in danger, you know, it's a slippery slope until any other minority can be put under that same foot. And I think that, and just leading with empathy goes a long way. One of my like main things, a lot of people know I love to be right. I love to be right about everything. But the best way to be right is to be willing to be wrong. Because if you tell me I'm wrong and I am wrong, I want to change right away. I want to get on the right team. And so whenever somebody like brings something to my attention that is something that I could be working on, something that my organizations could be working on, I'm like quick to get to the root of it, instead of like, you have to drop the ego and you have to drop the idea that you know everything and you know everybody else's experience, and you just have to be willing to get to the right.
I appreciate this question, and I think that it goes unexamined so much because of the fact that when you are intersectionally, I'll speak for myself, as somebody who is intersectionally marginalized, that it can be very easy to fall into a space of not being able to see the periphery of where privilege still exists. And my analysis really comes as somebody who intentionally went into work as a government official, is thinking about interfacing with systems, really to build on what Kayla was speaking to. And so when I think about folks who are, you know, when we build that inside-outside game, right, where you have folks in the system who are fighting to dismantle systems of oppression, you have folks outside the system, advocates, activists, who are fighting to dismantle the systems of oppression, that what is really important is to assume that you have privilege of some sort. If you had somewhere to sleep last night, you have privilege. You know, if you're able to walk down the street and your identity is instantaneously validated by someone's social conditioning and that's how they see you, that is a privilege. If you experience unconditional love as a child, that is a privilege. And so in that advocacy, where are you constantly creating space for folks who do not have the same level of privilege and power that you have? That is a question that really has to be, can only happen if you marry it with Kayla's point of the self-reflection. You have to recognize where your privilege shows up, and then double that with, and where am I creating space for leadership, for voice, for power, for folks who do not have the privileges that I have. But I would say, even if you are intersectionally marginalized, like all of us on this call are, you have to assume that you have privilege showing up in some way, and then operate from there.
Wow. I have chills, and this was just the first question, y'all. Woo. So good.
Can I say, I really love what Kayla said about, you know, not just checking boxes, because like, so I produce a show and a lot of times people are like, well, do you have a trans person? Do you have a cisgender? And it's like, there's a line between checking boxes and tokenism, and you don't want to just be doing it to get the credit for, you know. So it's tough sometimes to organically be like, okay, am I including everybody that I possibly can? But you do have to keep your eyes open and be mindful about, you know, not everybody on your show has to look like you, even though that's kind of the point of my show. But, you know, you want to make sure that you are including everybody. And like Phillipe said, like looking for and checking your own privilege. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's like this possibility where sometimes we think about representation as the goal, and that allows us to go wide, but not necessarily deep. And it's like, I don't just want someone to come into the meeting to say, you know, I have this identity, therefore we're good to go. It's like, what power and access does this person have? What's the commitment to their development and like long-term relationship that's beyond this like moment? And I think a lot of times we can fall into the trap of the wide and forsake the deep. And the deep is like what is actually how we get to this idea of freedom, right? Like that we're in relationship beyond what I need to make sure that when people see me, I'm good because I have this person and this person with me, and that when no one's looking, I'm actually still concerned about your humanity and making sure that you have the things that you have. And that to me is like, that's the real work of like doing this work, like going deep.
This is so deep. So Black folk have to work twice as hard to achieve success. Queer folk, even more so. With this high demand, how do you avoid fatigue and burnout?
I kind of, for me, it's something you kind of have to expect is like, a lot of people think, you know, I'm built for this. I used to be this way. I'm built for this. I can do this. I can go all day, baby, you know? And it's like, you could, but at what cost? And so I think a lot of times we forget to give ourselves breaks. We forget to give ourselves grace. And especially as social justice workers, a lot of time you feel so empowered and you feel so you're so desperate to do as much as you can, but you have to realize that your work will be better if you are rested. You will think sharper. You'll be more equipped to handle situations on a full stomach and a good night's sleep. And really, like, it's honestly like rest and self-care are so important because they do make you stronger, and you do yourself a disservice by not getting the things that you need.
Yeah, the question of like at what cost, I think is really important because you really do sacrifice your productivity by driving yourself into a hole and being depleted in that way. In recovery groups, a mantra is progress, not perfection. And when I was at my most constant fatigue, constant like border of I'm about to burn out, was when I was absolutely wedded to being perfect at everything that I did. Everything I produced, everything I said, it was like everything had to be perfect. And based on whose definition of perfection, right? That was when I actually had this like huge moment of like, oh my God, that is a form of internalized oppression, because perfectionism is a form of white supremacy, because like, who is defining what perfect means? And like that we have to live up to that. Why am I like absolutely burning myself out to be validated by this like wider system of white norms? And that was a huge breakthrough for me in recognizing actually the different ways that internalized oppression manifests. And I mean, this happened within the last like year, and I've done years of work around unpacking internalized oppression and like recognizing, you know, like doing all of that work. And like, so that was a huge breakthrough for me. And like, that absolutely shifted my relationship to the outputs that I create and put out there into the world. So that is, and then I recently read somewhere that like 80% of the work takes up 20% of your energy, and that last 20% takes up 80% of your energy. And so I just like had this moment where I was like, girl, I could do a lot with that 80% of energy. Like, and you know what? That 80% is still really good, you know, like, just because I am intersectionally marginalized and just because I'm coming in at such a deficit does not mean that my good is still not excellent. like my good is excellent, and I don't have to be excellent squared in order to be seen. Like, and like allowing myself that breathing space. And I will also say that like it was a complete game changer for me personally, finding my partner, who is absolutely amazing, and like being able to like, I'm a big introvert, so I'm not like, I need a huge community of people around me supporting me. It's like, I got my rock, I've got somebody I can vent to who holds it down. So being able to be very intentional about like, I am done with work now and I'm fully present with my family. And having those boundaries has also been incredibly critical to my well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I think I agree with everything that's been said. And what I'll add is, you know, the work that I do and the kind of ideology I subscribe to is that there just is no freedom on the back of one person. And there's like transformation isn't possible out of the actions of one person. And I used to feel, you know, I got into this work during Ferguson after Mike Brown was killed. And the uprising really created this kind of like energy where I was like, if I'm not doing every single thing if I'm not running myself into the ground, I am not in service enough to Black people in this moment. I am not showing up. And what I've learned is like very similar to, you know, what's been said, that if we are not whole, our work won't be whole, right? And like if we are depleted, you know, what we produce won't be whole either. In the like search for perfection, so it's a never-ending cycle. Your output is not even quality because your input is not quality. And so, thinking about self-care as like, and not like the self-care like, oh, you know, I just want to take off today, but like deeply committing to ensuring that their wholeness is prioritized, whether or not that's therapy, whether or not, you know, that's breaks, but not deprioritizing self. And then the other thing that feels really important to me is that community is necessary. You know, I alone cannot change St. Louis. St. Louis alone with all of its staff and members can't change St. Louis. And so understanding that it's our responsibility as people in leadership to develop new leaders. We get into this, you know, capitalism teaches us this idea that like you need to create and carve out a space for yourself for both like relevancy and success. But the truth is, if I am unable, there should be someone who can step into the place that I've occupied in service of the work to continue that work. That the work is not held and defined by one person or one entity. And so that community is both about developing and maintaining the work, but also sustaining ourselves. Having like-minded people, having conversations like this, I think pours back into us what we pour out sometimes. And having people who understand that are also committed to it and have that shared vision allows you to be able to express the level of vulnerability that is necessary when you reach moments of fatigue, right? And when you reach moments of burnout. And community helps to build the systems that say, you know, hey, Vixen, you're tired. Let us take this. So that, you know, this doesn't stop, but you don't collapse trying to get there. And I think when you build that level of community and accountability to other folks, again, like those deep relationships, then you figure out that fatigue happens, that burnout happens, and there's a way that the work can continue, and you don't lose yourself along the way. And I encourage folks to be in community with people like that. Find that community, whether it's a boo, shout out to mine, who like is my most trusted person, you know, but also it's friends. It's, you know, COVID took my annual beach trip with my girls. Like we have one every year. We start the year off with it. We say our affirmations together. We even leave the booze behind, or like, we're just gonna go do this together. And figuring out moments of restoration, I think, are really important in those community spaces.
Yeah, you know, this question is super important, as during COVID, capacities are waning like no other, and people are facing burnout just from walking out to get the mail. And so, you know, I really appreciate you guys answering this, because I know I personally am struggling with trying to maintain attentiveness.
I'm tired. I'm not like, it's tiring, you know, because look at what we're experiencing, you know, Black people are dying from this virus at an alarming rate. We're still being killed by the police. Lots of us are about to be evicted and not have stable housing. And I didn't see my dad yesterday. And there's not been a Thanksgiving in my life where I didn't see my dad. Even if I don't celebrate, you know, the concept of Thanksgiving, there was a third Thursday that I didn't see my father. And, you know, we didn't go around this big table and say things, you know, to each other, affirmation. And you feel that, right? And like, you got to honor the fact that you feel it. And sometimes the trick of white supremacy is that it tells you to just go in spite of. Like, don't sit in it. Don't say shit. I'm defining success. I'm ignoring the pain because there's like this like white gaze, right? There's this like exceptionalism we've drank, this Kool-Aid we've drank that says we're not human, we're not full. And sometimes we feel empty. And I think in a moment like this where we've lost so much and it's been such a hard ass year, you know, like we were in the streets, we had to vote, it was a pandemic, it's just a lot going on. People we should really honor the fact that we're still here. And if you just got up today and you didn't take off your pajamas and you made one bowl of cereal, good, clap for yourself, because that's a lot in this world, like in this moment.
Yeah, I feel like despite the pandemic and everything going on, I feel like so many times I still have the same expectations for myself and for my mission that I would have had if it was a regular year. And I was like, you are not going to get the same results that you would have in a regular year because nothing about this year is regular. So why are you expecting yourself to meet the same quotas and hit the same goals? Like, it's unrealistic, and you have to grade on that curve. Okay, like, yes, you would have been doing this, and that if everything was open, but it's not. So like, manage your expectations so that you're not considering yourself a disappointment, because you are killing it, all things considered, right?
Yeah, and I'll just add that this year, being a Minneapolis City Councilmember has been like the hardest year of my life, and I have not had the space to be able to be like, I'll just take a little bit of a step back. It's like, it has been constant leaning in, and it's been very hard, and trying to, it's like the cameras stopped showing up in Minneapolis, but like, it didn't stop. Like, not like what happened on the ground didn't stop. I know Kayla understands this very well. Like, what was happening,
and Misky about it all the time.
Yes,
like, when the work starts is when the cameras go away.
That's absolutely right. But also, like, the white backlash happens. There was a huge spike in violence, which I know also happened in St. Louis and Ferguson afterwards. Like, and then we're dealing with that on top of COVID. And so it's just like all of this has been happening at one time. And so for the folks out there who maybe are like in a position where you're maybe in a similar position to me, or, it's like, you still have to have that hard stop every day. Like, where you turn your phone over, you turn it off, and you Netflix and chill, or you cook dinner because you find cooking to be self-care. Like, even in all of that, there were some times when I wasn't able to do that because it like literally was nonstop, but I couldn't go at that pace forever, or else I wouldn't, I just, my outputs would be so bad. I would be a nightmare to be married to, and so, but like having those kind of boundaries are really, really critical, even if you are in the thick of a crisis. Like, still make sure that you are doing your best to set boundaries and stick to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I agree. So, 2020 has been a year that has been quite tumultuous. We've had fascism on the rise. We've had a president trying to take a coup and just take over the presidency again, even though he didn't win. With Joe Biden winning, a more neoliberal agenda will be put onto the table. With that being said, there are more opportunities for Black queer folk to get legislation that benefits us. What are ways that we can continue momentum of the movement to fight for Black queer humans? And what policy reform do you think we'll be able to get with the new Biden administration?
I'll dive into this since this is my arena. So while this administration is going to be heavily coming in with a neoliberal approach and framework to governing, I do think that there's more space than maybe historically possible under that sort of governing framework for progressive values. Progressives really did have a fairly strong voice in this election. And pushing the candidates further to the left and aligning more with progressive values. Not as far as we wanted to see, but we did see some progress. We did see some movement. So, in terms of policy agendas, I mean, we can really unpack a lot. And I think that what the difference is that we have to build in coalition, finding so the immediate thing that comes to mind is like restoring voter rights for folks who have felony criminal records. That is an issue that disproportionately impacts Black folks, and then the more marginalized you get and intersectionalized you get, the more it impacts. But that also is a wide swath of folks who are impacted by that. And so I think that building a coalition without losing our voices and our experience at the same time, I think that that's going to be really critical. I think that it is also important to remember that the president is not the end all be all. You have to think down ballot as well, continuously think down ballot. I'll just point out that under the Trump administration, there were not one, but 2 Black, queer, trans folks that were elected to one city council. So local politics are really where we have the ability to push progressive change. So thinking about who your Congress member is, thinking about who your state representatives and your state senators, thinking about who your city council, your mayors are. Think about those down ballot folks, because the closer that you get to the ground, the more likely you are to be able to push really strong progressive agendas, whether that's a $15 minimum wage or stick and safe time or whatever the case may be, transforming public safety. Like that's not going to happen through the president. That's going to happen through your city council members and your mayors. Like that's where that change actually happens. I mean, I'm a little bit biased given the fact that I do work in local government, but I mean, until I worked in local government, I had no idea how much every aspect of pretty much of somebody's life is impacted by local government. So if you really want to be able to have some real change, who are the people who actually understand the theories and practical application of liberation through governing and systems change? Who are those people? And then organize the hell behind them. Like, you gotta have their backs. One of the things that I have really seen that have been a challenge is progressives, we don't always work very well together. Sometimes it can be very all or nothing, which I will point out, all or nothing is a form of white supremacy. It's a manifestation of white supremacy. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And so it's like, how are progressive organizations supporting those folks so they get into office once they're in office? What I've seen time and time again, I have friends who are progressive local elected officials who come out of movement work. Once they get into the system, it's like, you're the system now. And, it's like there's a sudden shift in the dynamic. But like, I mean, so I'm a progressive And I unseated a 20-year city council president incumbent whose mother also held the seat and was a city council president before her for 24 years. And then another family member held the seat before her for like 8 years. And they were the most conservative folks on the city council. So that means that my ward actually had the highest percentage of Trump votes in the city. And I'm out here talking about completely rethinking our system of public safety, and I got nobody who has my back, because I'm not advocating for complete abolition. And don't get me wrong, like, I get it, but I have to show up in a governing perspective as well. And so, I mean, we can unpack all of that, but that's for another panel. But my point is, though, is that, like, I'm still taking a very progressive stance on completely transforming public safety. And there isn't a lot of support there. And so I'm just getting a lot of hits from conservatives. So as we're thinking about building political power, it's like, when you are organizing, get those folks in office. Who's your Congress member? Get a progressive, like, fight for that. State representative all the way down to city council. That is the way that we actually will do it. Don't count on the president to show up for us in that kind of way. I will say he will make it a lot easier. A new president will make it a lot easier for us on the local level. But in terms of our liberation, that happens closer to the ground.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, that all power is built locally. It's just not a container to build. Like when we talk about holding electeds accountable, we're already seeing. Yeah, so there are a lot of things that are going on in my head based on what was already said. So one, all power is local. So yes, we should be thinking about the Biden-Harris administration and the majority of the House, and people who can give their time to these Georgia runoffs should do that, because if you can have a Democratic trifecta on a federal level, it does make it easier to move things like aid, which I think is like going to be is on the top of folks' minds. So expanding how much our cities and communities are receiving for affordable housing, how much money is being received for like COVID relief, supplemental programs to our education system. All of that is like really important. Also, the Trump administration rolled back so much that had to do with the queer and trans community. And so those protections, like instituting them back and expanding, right? So making it easier for folks to access documentation changes, the healthcare, making sure that it actually like expands to include the types of like care that folks who are queer and trans need, hormonal therapies, that like our affordable healthcare system is actually affordable and accessible, and is actually moving to include the kind of structures that are necessary for someone who is in a marginalized identity to get the care that they need. So I do think we're going to see some movement around healthcare right off the rip. I do think we're going to see movement around student loans. There's like a lot of momentum around that. I do think we're going to see movement around voting rights and access to voting, because there are 28 states that are under Republican trifectas who are going to try their best to roll back protections after this last go round. So it's going to be harder to vote by mail. It's going to be harder to get automatic voter registration. In Missouri, we have neither, right? So getting those things. But I do think, what we've seen on a lot is like, we've also won a White House with a hyper-conservative Supreme Court, right? And so there's momentum to say, what does it look like to roll back marriage equality, and that these conversations that happen in Roe versus Wade. There's not a real conversation about legalizing and legalizing sex work. But there is a conversation around legalizing marijuana federally. And so really starting to think about pushing those narratives out, I think is really important, but also getting that politics is really, really local. We live in St. Louis, you live in Minneapolis. The road to the White House was paved by Black voters in those urban centers. They made it happen. And so Black people, which means Black queer people and Black trans people, have a lot to say about Democrats having power for the next 4 years. And so I really do think we have to step into our power in that way and be unapologetic about demanding the things that we want to see. I also think that we elected someone who has a long career as a liberal, as a moderate, even in some capacities, as a Dixiecrat in some relationship to some policies. And so we cannot at any time think that candidate is going to move us closer to liberation. I've been saying all year that this is about conditions, not candidates, right? And so I'd rather plant a seed in, a muddy terrain than in a desert. Like it may not be the exact place that I want to be, but it's moving us closer to the idea of building power. And we are putting more leaders in Congress, like the incomparable Cori Bush from the first district of Missouri, which is St. Louis. But it took a lot of power and deep organizing to get to change the terrain here to elect Cori Bush. And as someone who does that work, to think about Action St. Louis touched over 100,000 doors this year during a pandemic, right? Like we had to convince people that closing jails, defunding police, investing in community were viable options, so that when a candidate came along with that same rhetoric, they weren't the first person to say it in the room. It was actually meeting the movement, and people identify with that vision. And so what's the work that we're going to do to convince folks? Movement oftentimes, progressives oftentimes, they fall into this pocket of talking to themselves a lot. We preach to the choir a lot. Well, the choir knows we need to go outside of the church to find people to bring them into the church and get them into the choir. And we need to go sing outside of the church, right? So that people can get our message and subscribe to this vision as we think about building power. The last thing I'll say is that St. Louis, if you're watching this and you're in St. Louis and you live in the city, we have half of the board of aldermen up in 2021 and a mayor's race. And now we have an open mayor's race because the progressive wing, the movement, built the type of momentum that forced of incumbent to become a one-term mayor, because she didn't see a pathway to victory because of the power that we've been building. Don't take your foot off the gas just because Biden is in the White House. This is actually the moment to accelerate, apply more pressure, because we need to be clear that their allies and oppositions our allies right now may be our opposition tomorrow if we're clear on our vision. And so March 2021 is a huge election for the trajectory of our region.
Yeah, I mean, well, so much has been said, but I definitely would say I feel like what needs to be acknowledged by the Biden administration, and I'm sure it has in many ways, is that this past election it couldn't have been done without the Black and Brown communities, and especially the Black queer communities, I think, came out in droves as well. And I think we need to, even more so, it's been addressed, but I think we need to really combat voter suppression in so many ways, because it is apparent that, Black communities make a huge difference. So if we're all educated and given the opportunity to vote, it would really change the landscape. I would say, Chicago has a Black lesbian mayor, and it's what we were talking about before, and having representation versus just checking a box. We have a Black lesbian mayor who has not really been a friend to the Black community or the queer community in her first year. And so you really do have to, not just check the box, but make sure that, your voice is being heard and that the people that are holding these places are actually doing the work. So yeah, I agree with everything, yeah.
We got you, fam. We're gonna help you get your mayor out. Don't worry.
Thank you.
So this one's a little bit more lighthearted. A lot of the questions are very cerebral and kind of emotional, thinking about how they affect people. This one too is as well is emotional, but it focuses around art. So what works of art across any medium would you recommend to Black queer youth to promote a positive sense of cultural identity?
I'm not going to say Beyonce first.
I'll say Beyonce. Yeah. We should honor the queen, so I'm gonna make sure to give you space for that. I will also say that I think we're starting to see so many local artists who are writing and creating such beautiful art for Black queer people. Most notably, I'd like to mention J. Marie is Holy and their new single, Here Queer and Stain. who, you know, I think is often thinking about this intersection of Black and queer folks who are in this work and understanding like what we, you know, the power that we have and the power that we're building. And then also like Be Said Well, I listen to them. Yeah, and music is my jam. So I am always looking for new artists who have beautiful music about, you know, what it means to tell stories about Black queer love. That's such an affirming space that, like, you know, we do incredible things, we build incredible things, we love incredibly, it's passionate, and that those stories need to be heard. So I just would mention those two right off the top.
Well, Beyonce. And then on top of that, so my show, BlackGirlMagic, is currently on a streaming service called Open Television. And the whole streaming service has queer POC content. And so it's all different types of television shows and dramas and skits and scenarios that uplift and discuss Black queer issues. So check that out. It's a very cheap subscription. Also, for me growing up, Elin Harris books were so integral to me, like seeing someone discuss an environment that reflected my own. Elin Harris, James Baldwin. You know, if you still read books, you should. Those are good people to look for. And then one of my favorite musical artists right now is Keenan Lonsdale, who's also an actor and also Saitembu. But his music is very good, and I would suggest that you listen to him.
I ain't got nothing. I don't get to have fun with art and stuff. So I just took some notes for when trying to squeeze in a little self-care. So, I mean, it's hard to find myself reflected back in media. And so that's what I've got on that one.
That's what you just said also made me think about, I don't know why it popped into my head, but it's not like, you know, mainstream TV, that's not for us, right? But there's this so much culture outside. I haven't had cable in my entire adulthood, so I don't know what that feels like anymore. But I also think about like the Terrell show. Like I watched that faithfully, and just seeing this like Black gay man do this singing Jeopardy show and O.M. Kaylin and folks like that. It just made me think about this like rising tide of Black queer artists and curators really who are building this like really awesome content like outside of the like normal structures of media platforms. Instagram is a world where you can curate a Black queer experience.
You really can.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. See, I'm not with all the hip young stuff, so I gotta figure out how to do that. I will just throw out there, I am writing a science fiction novel that will have a Black queer trans lead, so I'll let you know when that happens, and we'll put it on the list.
Yeah. Also, I mean, hopefully everybody has, but for me, like when I first saw the movie Moonlight, I was so sideswept because I had never seen myself portrayed so eloquently on screen before. And I was like, wow, that was my experience. So check it out if you're a young Black gay boy.
I love that. So we have two more questions. We're in it. This has been a really good conversation. I've really enjoyed like everything. I'm gonna watch this multiple times and take notes and try to be a better person based on the amazing like knowledge y'all are giving me. Mm-hmm. So looking at what issues affect the Black queer community, there's a lot of issues that are affecting us every single day, and we all don't have the capacity to combat every single one of those issues. What issues are most important to you and why?
Yeah, okay. They all are. But you know, I came into this work through police violence, and so I'm so committed to this idea of abolition and what it means to present options for us to redefine and envision a world without like carceral solutions and punitive solutions. And so I'm really excited about that. And I think, you know, what we know is that the criminal legal system is already awful for everyone. It's especially awful for like Black, queer, and trans folks, that the experience upon arrest is just the most dehumanizing, awful experience. And starting to think through what are the things that are criminalized that even create a pipeline to the carceral system and undoing that. So I do think about things like what does it mean to like legalize more drugs, decriminalize, legalize sex work. Shout out to like the Moho Justice Collaborative here in Missouri, and just, like the cliques of folks who are teaching us in real time. That excites me, right? Because it helps to stretch my imagination about like how we think about alternatives. The other thing that I think is just like so important is housing. I'm someone who experienced evictions twice, and in St. Louis, there's already just a lack of affordable housing. There are a lack of like protections for people who can access affordable housing, and there's a pathway to just like extreme discrimination for folks, particularly queer and trans folks in this state. And so thinking about how to build that local power to make sure that we're actually, combating the kind of state violence that's coming out of our the state legislature and sometimes the federal government. But I think housing is like, we're going to experience a crisis that's very similar to 2008, that's attached to this pandemic. And what is going to hit hardest are like low income renters, and that's overwhelmingly folks like that Black queer people are overrepresented in that demographic of folks. And so just thinking about that, like those two issues feel super resonant to me. And then I'll also just add that like healthcare, right? This year, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and we're about to have to go through that journey. And also thinking about like, as a queer person, I often think about how much it costs to like build a family if that's what we want to do. And so both like the kind of responsive medicine, and then the kind of the accessing the care around like family planning, therapy, and all those things that are typically not covered, fighting for a way for those to get covered so that, we can have access to the things that like family planning that we want to without having to drop 20 bands, like I don't want to, I don't want to give up my dream of being a mother because, our healthcare system is shit and doesn't see the value of queer couples procreating and like being nuclear families. And so those are the things that I think about off the top.
Yeah, I really try to focus on things that like give us agency. And one of the things that I came across and really activated me as an activist when I was young and in high school was the fact that, like men who have sex with men aren't able to give blood. Like, I think that one, if you're a teenager in high school and your school is having these like blood drives, it's very dehumanizing to be turned away because of your sexual orientation. And it also, in, a year of a pandemic, it is highlighted as more arbitrary and just ignorant and based in so much hatred with no science behind it. And then I think about decriminalizing sex work. I think that's so important and will give so many people agency. And I think if you think of like OnlyFans and things like that as sex work, so many of us have only been able to survive this quarantine because of sex work. So it really needs to be lifted in so many ways, and in a way that doesn't open it up. I always say decriminalize instead of legalize, because I don't want sex work to be open to police scrutiny and those types of things. So I'm careful with that. But yeah, just giving Black, queer, and trans people as much agency in this world without, having to suggest ourselves to being put under the foot of oppression even more.
My area of passion is really around civic and political participation by intersectionally marginalized folks. It's like we have these public hearings and it's older, white, homeowners, cisgender, straight folks who show up and demand more police. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We are in the middle of it's about to start snowing here. It snowed a couple times already, but it's about to get real cold in Minneapolis. Nobody said nothing about housing. All the schools are shut down. There's nothing for kids to do. Nobody talked about things for kids to do. Everybody, like, we had around 160 people show up to the latest budget hearing, and an overwhelming majority of them showed up, probably at least 150, showed up and demanded more police. And I try to get folks to understand, including my colleagues, that is not representational of the people in our community. And so how are we being intentional about creating space for more folks, Black folks, queer folks, trans folks, and all the intersections of those? How are we creating space for more voice from folks who are actually living this experience in ways that folks who are actually showing up and speaking cannot even fathom? And governments and elected officials in particular can only do that based on folks' feedback on what works for them. And so that's one place is through civic participation, and then again, political participation. And I'll also just give a quick shout out. Minneapolis actually has the sex worker organizing project, and we work together to help put some worker protections in place for adult entertainers. So I was very excited about that. And they had signs that Minneapolis loves strippers, and it was like really great. So just wanted to shout out to that. And they had quite a few Black women and both cis and trans women who were a part of it. So I thought that was really awesome. But anywho, so political participation. So if we are not actually politically engaged, not only in elections, but in between elections, like in the decisions that are being made, the system will never work for us. Like, the system will never change. And so again, kind of going to the point of like, find the folks who are the strongest voices, who are your allies, who operate from a framework of liberation. Again, representation is not enough. Like, we see it in Chicago. It is not enough. We have to have folks who are actually in office, who are operating from a liberation perspective and goal, and then continue to organize legislative campaigns. So what are the things that folks are working towards? One of the big things that I'm working on is transforming community safety, and really doing it from a public health approach with violence prevention and intervention strategies, et cetera, et cetera. And that's work I've been doing for years, but I've been like carrying that along by myself. And that's a legislative campaign. Changing the budget, that's a legislative campaign. So what are the things that you want to see changed? Who are your allies in office, and how are you building power together to push that person, but then also have that person's back? Because you don't want to push somebody right off the ledge, and then your allies don't then stay in office. So civic participation and political participation, we have to increase our voice in those two areas, or else the systems will continue to operate at the status quo, which the status quo is our oppression.
Yeah. We don't like the status quo around here.
No, ma'am.
But you should know your status. So that brings us to the last question, and it's a question that I personally have been thinking about for such a long time. As someone that is part of the movement, I often hear theory that is conflicting, that is used to reinforce already instated ideas, such as Audre Lorde's, "You can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools." And that often gets applied to voting and saying, oh, we can't vote, we can't participate in the system because the master made it. And yet we have another theory that some say it's by Fanon, some say it's by Albert Camus. It is by any means necessary, fighting for liberation by any means necessary. And this phrase often gets associated with violence. And these terms aren't often interchangeable and kind of create conflicting theory in which we use phrases that reiterate already formed ideas. So how can we have any means necessary apply to voting? And how can we not use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house and apply it to violence? And just looking at the nuances in that, I would love for you three to kind of add your perspective.
Yeah, I want to say I really love applying don't use the master's tool to dismantle the master's house, apply it to violence, because I think a lot of times people ignore that the master used violence to get the house in the first place. And so I've never heard it contextualized in that way, and I really appreciate it. But I think what so many of us need to realize is that it does take all kinds. It takes people, making peaceful protest and, being that example of, like when they go low, we go high. But it also takes some people who are willing to go low. And so I think when we realize, and I think a lot of times in the church, when I was growing up, I heard this, it takes all kinds, or it takes a village, and those sorts of things. And I think, you have to have people who are willing to do the dirty work, and you have to have people who are willing to be the figurehead. And, that's harmony, that's unity, and we can't throw stones at each other. In my drag race history and everything, I have learned so much about not telling other Black people how to survive their experience. Because for me, I have my way of doing things. I don't let bullshit slide. I call people out in the moment. But being in a competition and seeing other Black girls there with me, they didn't sign up for that. They didn't ask me to come and blow up the spot and make them uncomfortable. And I'll just use this as an example. And so I had to, give the grace to other people who are surviving this competition or surviving this world in a way that serves them and eventually will serve us. I use my good sister Qu'art, recent winner of All Stars 5 of Drag Race. She has a completely different approach to things. And me, I have beaten down every wall and had every uncomfortable conversation. And I think in a lot of ways on Drag Race, that has opened up the platform for us to have 4 winners in a row who are Black queens. And I just saw recently my sister Qu'art, who's a lot more palatable to white audiences, was on the cover of Gay Times, which is a London magazine, with Black Lives Matter earrings on. And it's like, these things, I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it wasn't for people like Shay, who makes it easier, and she wouldn't be able to take the steps that she takes if it wasn't for people like me. And I think it really just takes all kinds, and we have to realize that we're working together, and you really can't invalidate someone else's means of survival.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I'll be quick and say, if we knew how to get to freedom, we'd already be free. And so the idea that we prioritize one ideology over another, or one, we can't in one breath say Blackness is not monolithic, right? And then not also agree that Black philosophy and ideology is not monolithic. Different people subscribe to different viewpoints about what it means and what it takes to get free. And so we have to figure out the collective strains, right? And there is the work that is like transformative. And then there's the work that is about mitigating harm in real time. And I caution people to understand, as someone who deeply believes that Black people will be free, who will spend my life trying to complete that mission, that right now and today, Black people are suffering. And freedom is not within grasping, it's not in grasping distance. And so we have to figure out right now how to keep Black people alive, how to keep Black queer folks in positions to thrive. And so sometimes that requires understanding how to get the fuck around the master's house, where the bread is, which room is not as violent, right? Because we're in it. And, at the same time, we don't have to stay there. You know what I'm saying? Like the idea, our North Star should be far, far beyond the master's house. But there are a few master's houses that we're gonna have to get through. We're gonna have to get through the master's house that's around white supremacy. We have to get through the master's house that's around capitalism. We have to get through the master's house that's around heteronormativity, right, and patriarchy. And each of those that we get to and that we dismantle, we take some things, we leave some things behind, but we don't stay there because that's not our North Star. And sometimes you have to figure out, we have to figure out how to have these political debates in a way that actually produces something that moves us along. And sometimes we get stagnated in the political ideological conversation that we're no longer moving toward our North Star, right? Like we're no longer moving there. And so I think right now I have to always hold two truths. That one, this shit sucks. These systems were not built by us. They were not meant for us. They will forever harm us. And I can lift some of the weight off of our necks temporarily so that we can have the space to fucking think about the thing, getting out of this house, right? Getting out of it. And so I just think that they both matter. And if for folks who do work, like who are actually in the work and not, I'm not a theorist, I understand theory as a practice, as a muscle that I need to build, but I'm a practitioner. And as a practitioner of movement, as an organizer in movement, I cannot say I can't do that because that's not revolutionary enough. Feeding someone is fucking revolutionary. Making sure they have a place to stay where they are far from abuse is revolutionary. Creating space for people to feel affirmed in their identity is revolutionary. And if we don't practice revolutionary things now, when we get to freedom, as I said before, we're going to replicate the houses. We're going to build a house that looked exactly like the one we just left. If we don't caution ourselves to take a second. And so I think it's both and. We need to, by any means necessary, build the spaces where we can actually practice freedom dreaming. And we also need to create, in order to have those moments in those spaces, we got to navigate the reality of the context that we're in. And so I don't see them as opposing views. I think that it is both, we have to interrogate violence because we endure violence. We have to interrogate structures like our democracy because we are a part of it and it impacts us. But one is not more inherently valuable than the other. It really depends on the moment and the context and the organizing that we've done to get there. You can walk around with a gun all day. If you ain't gonna pull the trigger, that shit ain't revolutionary. You understand? So it's like, that to me doesn't matter. So if you go carry a gun, if that's what your action is, cool. I also have this turf for you to go knock 100 doors to get people to turn out so we can expand Medicaid, because on our pathway to Medicare for all, we need to get 300,000 more people insured. And that may not be revolutionary for you, but for the 200,000 people who don't have fucking health care and now they can go to the doctor, I think that they're grateful for the work that we're doing.
I knew I should have let Kayla go last. It's hard to follow up with that brilliance. And so much there. I mean, in this question, there's just so much to unpack. And so I really like wrestling with it because it's something I've thought about a lot as somebody who is actually like in a major decision-making space. Like, what is the best pathway that I can help operationalize from my position of power? So these are the kind of questions that I've wrestled with a lot. For me, I spent a lot of time reflecting on like, what exactly are the master's tools? Maybe it was mentioned that in the context of voting, but I also see like white supremacy itself as a tool, right? And we unknowingly use it against one another. And so we cannot liberate ourselves through using the systems of oppression that actually are oppressing us. So that's how, I think about that. I also think about the master's house from a very much like a systems perspective, like very concretely, like government, for example. I operate the way that I do because I believe that it is possible to dismantle systems of oppression. I do think, though, we have to build new systems. The way that I see it is humans built these systems. Humans can unbuild them and build something better. And we need folks in those positions to be able to move us through that progression. We are not going to be able to put new window treatments up and change out the furniture, but the structure itself is the same. Like, we will not get different outcomes. And so thinking about like, what are actually the tools? So I think about it from kind of that perspective. And, you know, in terms of like conflict, conflicting theories of liberation, Kayla took the words right out of my mouth. It's a both and. Either or is a symptom of white supremacy. It is a Eurocentric analysis of choice. A Black-centric, Afrocentric approach to choice is a both and. That is rooted in our genes and our culture is a both and. And if we begin to operate from it's either this or that, then we again are using those master's tools of white supremacy as a form of oppression. So how are we looking at it more nuanced in the actual application in real life? How do we take it from the cerebral to the concrete in life? It's never all or nothing. It's never either or. And the fact that we have been forced for that either or, we've been forced for that all or nothing, that is how we've ended up where we are. So how are we thinking more nuanced? And I will just say that I think that democracy in of itself, like the moral drive behind democracy, I think is actually very much so rooted in our culture as Black folks, where there's collective voice, where there's collaboration, where there is agency and autonomy within a collective. I think that is just so deeply Black. The problem is that white supremacy and capitalism have co-opted democracy and have resulted in what we have. And so how do we reclaim democracy? I think is a question that we also have to wrestle with as Black queer folks in particular. So those are my thoughts on that.
Oh, thank you. You know, all of you have provided so much. My brain is just spinning around thinking like, how can I apply this? How can I apply this theory? And like thinking about all of this. And I really hope that the viewers at home are like really thinking about how to take some of these thoughts and take some of these things that we've talked about and apply them, or really think about how they don't apply to these people and how to like create theories that apply to them themselves, you know, like thinking about, hey, maybe that doesn't apply to me, but what does apply to me? And like really like look at it. And I really hope that these conversations spark, you know, some gears turning in the audience that are watching from all over. So I want to thank you all for taking the time today and joining us for this panel. It was so robust and I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope you all learned something today too.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me and being part of this brilliant panel of all these folks. So thank you.
It's so brilliant.
It was so
nice
fun
to meet and speak with everybody.
Same.